and welcome everyone to our latest Orbus live event entitled The Influence of Artificial Intelligence on Enterprise Transformation. I'm very pleased to see you all here live on demand, and for those of you who are catching up on the recording. Today, we're taking a deeper dive into the intersection of business and technology and exploring the world of artificial intelligence operations, or what's better known today as AIOps. So I have the pleasure to meet today with Pierre van Elswijk, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Tuuring, who specialise in AIOps and observability. So good afternoon, Pierre. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to join me today for this LinkedIn live interview. To our audience, please feel free to post any comments or questions during the session in the chat box. We'll try to answer them at the end if we have time. So to begin then, Pierre, it'd be great if you can tell our audience a bit about yourself and indeed some of the amazing things that you and the team at Tuuring have been doing.
Definitely. Many thanks for having me, Rupert. I think our schedules are pretty similar in terms of busyness and planning difficulties.
Indeed.
And thanks everyone for being on the session with us today. A bit about myself. I've been active within the enterprise IT world since the late 90s, been around for a while, and I've been lucky to have been involved in some very ambitious and very challenging change programs across a variety of industries, where I experienced firsthand how software and IT can really transform business in a fantastic way. But I've also definitely seen it fail to deliver true business value, and for some of the reasons that we'll talk about later in the session. So my background is very much computer science and also a good dose of business management. And it's exactly the crossover between those two areas that has defined a number of my ventures in the past and a big reason for co-founding Tuuring. So the name Turing is clearly a reference to Alan Turing, as one of the founding fathers of modern day computer science. But it's also a nod to our Dutch roots, in which the verb turen, with W, means observing something from a distance. Turing was incorporated in 2019, but some of the ideas that we have in the current platform date back a good bit before that.
Great, that's really interesting, Pierre. Thanks for the some of the history there. So perhaps tell us a little bit about your platform, the Turing platform, and maybe touch on some of the things that makes it really innovative.
Yeah, sure. So Turing is active in a market called AIOps. You alluded to that already. So AIOps stands for Artificial Intelligent Operations. And the platform we created is called Performance Insights. So it provides functionality from the three primary AIOps areas, being observability, engagement, in an IT service management way, and automation of it. And you could argue, rightly so, that AIOps is somewhat of a container definition, in the way that security or SIEM solution could also be labeled AIOps. So it's important to remember that the Performance Insights platform, it's, as the name suggests, its sole focus is digital performance. So yeah, really looking forward to discussing AIOps and enterprise architecture in a combined way here today. Great.
Thanks for the fantastic introduction, Pierre. Exciting stuff. So we chose today's session as a good topic for discussion because it ties in some of the core topics around understanding management of today's digital business. It also sets us up nicely to explore the world of observability, and so how organizations can use it as a tool to support optimization of their business value chains. So perhaps in layman's terms, what this means really is understanding the health of an ecosystem of systems and processes, and therefore allowing businesses to streamline their operations based on data and insights. So some very common themes there. In this session, we're going to be discussing next generation monitoring and observability, which used to be, if I remember correctly, Pierre, under the umbrella of IT operations management, or ITOM.
Correct. Yeah.
And now, really testing my memory here. So under the domain of AIOps, we cover IT infrastructure monitoring, application performance monitoring, network performance monitoring, and finally digital experience monitoring. So quite a lot of scope there. Great. So Pierre, my recent research into the AIOps market, it's clear there's significant and growing demand for the use of data and analytic tools. So both what's referred to as the domain focus ones, but also the domain agnostic platforms. I think Gartner indicates that there's an estimated 19% 5-year compound annual growth rate. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think is driving this growth?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there's certainly truth, in the fact that like a growing number of organizations would struggle answering questions about the level of control and visibility they have, over their total digital landscape. Mm-hmm. The complexity, like under the hood, if you will, is ever increasing. So anyone who's ever been in charge of an IT infrastructure or a part of it, or an application, or maybe an entire business service, they know how difficult it is, to stay in control of all the different components and all the time. Also, all the factors around it, ever more so external factors. So in our experience, organizations are often less in control than they would like. And we want to help them getting that control and visibility so they can concentrate on using IT to its full capability and drive their businesses forward as a result of that. So, back to your question, what is driving that predicted growth? I think this is directly related to the growth of the landscape itself, combined with the increase in complexity. So customers and end users, they have already realized that modern day data and analytics tools are needed to help them with that.
Yeah. I think, of course, figuring out bottlenecks in performance of applications across the corporate IT estate is not a new problem, right? It's very interesting to hear your perspectives on that, Pierre. Okay, from an Orbus point of view, as a leading EA SaaS vendor, we're always hearing stories from our own customers. They're kind of frustrated because they're challenged with finding information about which applications and technologies are impacting the performance of their business services. And indeed, they ultimately manage these with this kind of fragmented and stale views of data across multiple technology domains. And just looking under the covers of a large organization to see how complex these businesses today are becoming. And the needs are changing. Multiplying distributed data sources, there's increasing data flows and APIs, and all this is leading towards this, I guess, exponential growth of data. And further to that, we read a lot about the democratization of data and how data is today one of businesses' most valuable strategic assets. Yep. But as you've described already, AIOps solves more than just making data available to users, like the observability piece. So perhaps you can share with us some of the sort of typical use cases that you're seeing amongst your customers, and tell us about the key challenges that AIOps addresses.
I can highlight two customer situations where the use of AIOps has helped them tremendously. First one is a customer that had to merge two ERPs together. So enterprise resource planning applications, large, complicated, complex applications as a result of acquisitions that they had done. So that merge would certainly result in pretty much doubling the amount of users, in the system that remained, and more than doubling, I think almost tripling, if I remember correctly, the amount of data that was processed in the resulting ERP. And one of the key success factors was that performance could not be impacted at the end of it. The other customer situation was one where they knew ahead of time that within a large business chain, so many applications involved, a lot of infrastructure involved, they would be increasing their business flow, so the throughput, if you will, by a factor 10 at least. And they needed to know ahead of time which components, if any, and the components, they could be applications or infrastructure, but also people and processes, which parts of that entire chain needed to be optimized or changed. So those are two very, concrete examples where we see that AIOps has really helped.
Okay, interesting. So certainly to me, from what you've just described, these customer use cases, they actually sound quite similar. They're both trying to remove bottlenecks in performance. Can can you explain the key differences, maybe like what the approach has been to address them?
Yeah, you're right. It does. Ultimately, this is about removing bottlenecks. The differences were that the first one I described, the merging of the two ERPs. It was a change program, with a set time. So timeline wasn't very large. I think maybe 8 or 9 months, something like that. And the budget that they had for making sure performance was not impacted was going to be used for hiring specialists or allocating people they had to making sure that the elements got tuned or improved. And the issue was that what were they going to choose? Like a database tuning expert or an application performance consultant, maybe a virtualization specialist. And within the time and also the budget, they couldn't simply hire all those people combined. But if you don't know yet what to target, and that's where we really help them in applying AIOps. So to know ahead of time, what specialty was required. The second one was much more. It was a much longer period of time, but the chain was also much more diverse. So it could have, like I said, dealt with changing applications, maybe replacing them, or even changing the processes and like how the people worked with the system. So in that sense, yeah, they were comparable, you could argue, but they really had a different business case, both of those situations.
Right. Okay. Fascinating. Yeah. When I wear my enterprise architecture hat, and more broadly consider this through the lens of generally digital transformation, I can see so much commonality here. Second example you gave particularly overlaps with a lot of what I hear from customers that I speak to. I'd also like to get your thoughts on a related topic. So rather like EA, I expect AIOps is often tarred with the same IT-centric brush. What I mean by this is that if we typically solve problems for, say, application dependencies and risk, people immediately regard this being IT focused. Or likewise, if you're solving a problem in your scenario with things like network capacity throughput, that's also seen as IT focus. But what's really happening, of course, is that this is obvious to you and me. There's a business problem at the heart of this, and the business goal is obviously enabling the organisation to run better, faster, and smarter.
Yep.
So, worth me underlining again here the fact that both EA and AIOps are very much business-centric, proactive approaches to solving these important organisational challenges. But I'd love to hear your views on that, and perhaps the perception around AIOps as it evolves from maybe somewhat of a legacy of classical monitoring to where it is today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, and that last thing you mentioned, the classical monitoring, that of course was always very, technical oriented, because that's where it started. But I believe nowadays, there's simply no organization anymore that is truly analog, or fully non-digital, like being able to operate, without any type of digital IT reliance.
Yeah, really true. I was, even the most traditional businesses are now going, online, of course. I'm trying to quickly think of some examples which aren't, but even, businesses like high street bookshops or farms, they're benefiting from being more connected and intelligent.
Yeah, and it makes complete sense, because information technology was always about automating and aiding everyday tasks and processes. And I think, as much as it is perhaps a trend, making the digital business world more observable, better observable, it is it evolves. So it is a very natural thing to happen. So for me and the teams within Tuuring, the business focus is completely natural. It's an evolution of what is happening in monitoring or the observability world. So yeah, for us, it's everyday practice.
Yeah. And as you described, when we talk about observability, I guess my definition is just so much data to make sense of. There's systems, there's connectivity, there's capacity, there's throughput, etc., etc. Can you perhaps give some more background around what kind of data is being collected, who consumes it, what roles are they, and once they've consumed that data, then what they do with it? Ultimately, how do they make better decisions with that data?
Yeah, this is a good point because there is so much of it, and it is used. That statement like data is ever growing. It's quoted a lot, but not often is it put or is it quantified. Made concrete. So I'll give it my best shot. The best example I can give, maybe in the context of performance health, is user concurrency. For a landscape, or I guess in EA terms, if you do a rationalization, that's a really important piece of information to have. How many users do I have in my system at any given moment, and what are those users doing? So never mind, what was thought of what they were doing, or maybe from an old piece of information some time back, but right now or last week. So in the legacy monitoring world, systems would need to keep track of active sessions. So think of it, you had a log on trigger and log off, and you were in between. That meant that you had an active user. In modern observability platforms, if you can digest, the data sources that you mentioned, logs, metrics, you'll be able to come up with a far more meaningful user concurrency metric, because you won't only know when they were active, you also know what they did. How much impact did they have? Were they was it a lot of throughput they created, or not so much? That is relevant for knowing how your systems are used. And those data sources, those logs, those metrics, the events, they are already available in systems today. It's just that if you combine all of them, it is such an enormous amount of data. You can't analyze that fast enough without advanced data tooling.
Yeah, I'm sure. What about monitoring quality? So quality metrics. And do you have any examples, perhaps, where monitoring is related to service levels, SLAs, and indeed user experience?
Yeah, it's a very relevant example, actually. I guess quality of service was something that already existed way back. Things like KPIs, but if you will, user experience or digital experience monitoring, if you will, that's kind of the newest member, of the observability family. And in the past, it was only possible, usually at a very high cost, to do that if you had full control. You knew like where your offices were. You had on-premise data centers. You like even network connections. They were static and private. You knew everything about your users in a way. That it's not possible anymore today. This very session, I'm working from a satellite location where I'm not normally. So right now we talk about cloud adoption. Truly mobile users. We have vendors that are part of maybe they're responsible for a part of the service. So it's really hard to have to deliver a proper service level from the end user point of view. Because ultimately they run your business. So again, going back to those the metrics, the logs and events, if you combine that and be proactive back to your users, I think you can really increase the service level for them.
And Pierre, just for we've talked about this for hours, you and I, but just for the benefit of the audience, can you give us some kind of feel for the volumes of data that's being collected by Tuuring?
Definitely. So to make it really concrete, let's take a single workstation, laptop. It could be a virtual workplace. It's quite easy to produce up to 1 gig of performance data per workstation, per user per day. Wow. Or take an application, 20 million data points for an application each day. It's normal. So if you calculate that through in an enterprise scenario where you have, anywhere from say 3,000 to a few 100,000 of users, perhaps, who together use, from, I don't know, 50, perhaps 1,500 different applications. You can do the math. You can see that the end result in terms of data is absolutely staggering.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing. And how do you make sense of all the data? How can you manipulate it and turn it into measurable return on investment?
The good thing about IT is still ever maturing and evolving, and the result of that has been some real valuable standards and standardizations around data, standards such as open telemetry, AppDex, but also vendor support standardizations such as the Elastic Common Schema. So normalization of fields make the management of all that data a lot more streamlined. And into measurable return on investment, it's ultimately allowing the users to allow a business to have their users to do much more with their valuable time. I guess that's the summary of that.
Yeah, and with obviously all this data being collected, we can't conclude the conversation by talking about AI and ML. Of course, as soon as AI and ML enter discussion in business, lots of questions come out of it. How does it work? What does it do? Is it real? Is it a robot? Is my job going to be threatened? And today, as practitioners, we're still having to encourage businesses to make that leap of faith. Many stakeholders still don't trust the data that's been generated from AI, and they want to the logic behind the algorithms that produces the results of them. So maybe you could tell us a bit about some of the concerns you've seen around AI in your domain, and perhaps touch on both the practical issues, but also maybe some of the ethical ones.
Yeah, definitely. I think the term, explainable AI is something that is coming up more and more, and that really touches on the practical use of artificial intelligence. So I'll get to that in a bit. But one of the downsides, maybe, of the hype, if you will, or enthusiasm, if you look at it in a more positive way, of artificial intelligence and machine learning, is that it has raised so many concerns and assumptions, sometimes false assumptions. And I understand that very well, because AI and ML have long been used kind of as magic terms, in a way. So often vaguely explained or not explained at all, or simplified way too much. Nevertheless, it is undeniable that, modern technology, including those two, they allow use cases that were simply unattainable even 10 years ago. Like, I remember some demand and material forecasting software from, I think it was early 2000, that needed gigantic hardware investments, and up to 24 hours of runtime to do a single prediction for a single factory, let's say a month ahead. Like, if you would run the same thing today, it would definitely be labeled advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning, but we would be able to run that same prediction on like a decent sized laptop, or even take it, consume it as a. So my point is that, we've made both huge strides in what is technologically possible, and create value accordingly, but we still sometimes overdo it, on the kind of on the new and magic front. So, and this, unfortunately, it raises concerns, and sometimes is holding customers back in adopting it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. And what about your customers? What are they saying, or what are they asking around this?
So a very recent example actually was, I mentioned AIOps. It's really three areas. Observability is the most recognizable one. The automation is also a real part of that. You mentioned robotics, and I think it was one of our customers and a potential customer asked around, if we come up with actionable insights, we do a suggestion of maybe increasing or decreasing a certain part of the capacity. And they were outright worried that the system would be making those changes by itself, without any oversight, without any user input. And so, that is obviously not the case. In our view, if you combine, human control, the human experience, and modern day technology, the result is much better data-driven decisions. So, at the end, the customer will always be in control.
As always, indeed. Thank you for that, Pierre. So we talked about AI and ML a little. The fact there's so much data to process on the corporate estate, and this reminds me about own customers. We hear those who are practicing enterprise architecture in different stages of maturity asking us how we can help them, given their organizational complexity. They want to know how to better manage and visualize dependencies from strategy to execution and operations. Something we refer to as cutting through the chaos. And listening to you talk, it all sounds very, very familiar. It's clear there's a great deal of overlap and commonality between AI ops and enterprise architecture, especially when you think about how we both help to empower the digital business on its transformation journey.
Yep.
So, if we consider some of the classic use cases that we support at Orbus, so cloud migration, application rationalization, app modernization, particularly when it comes to M&A scenarios, I'm really keen to hear more about your views on how you see AIOps interleaving with EA and how together they might enable businesses to respond to tough challenges, such as where to invest or what to change.
Absolutely. If we talk about commonality, I think there's a huge shared factor in that both EA and AIOps help customers with making the complexity, like we touched upon that, that complexity is ever growing. And I think both EA and AIOps make that complexity much easier to control and visualize. And with the current rate of change, you need much more real-time data than ever. So as for like a combined use case, I really see that in two phases. The first one is to have the views that EA can deliver, like the complete view, if you will, over the entire landscape, to bring those views to life, to really augment them with live metrics, if you will. So not just data that was that came from an interview maybe some months back, but data that is relevant to today's data or last week's data or baselines that were created over the course of months. So that would be, I guess, my first where I see value straight away. And then once you have that data, much more quality data, I can see a scenario where you can really do some advanced predictions. You talked about cloud migration, app modernization. If you talk about maybe hundreds or thousands of users that have to migrate to something else, another release or another platform, you could really run some advanced forecasting on what will happen. And as a result, you would get a lot better decision making. You're going to have to invest one way or another, but better than to do that investment based around really sound data-driven information. So, and like I said before, a lot of that data is already there. So I think in combination we can really allow that the users to use their own data to make better decisions.
Yeah. Well, great to hear that Tuuring, you're helping businesses with those investment decisions, which can be very tricky. I guess also helping guide the business through new ways of working, very important. Actually, I want to mention one thing that at Orbus we're hearing a common theme across which is being asked a lot around operational resilience. And I'm actually pleased to say that we're actively working with some of our flagship customers on delivering capabilities in the product in ISO 365 to help these organizations identify and eliminate points of failure, so they can also address and meet regulatory requirements and legislation. For example, those introduced by the FCA recently. In Turing's point of view, do you have any plans around operational resilience, and how's the tie-in there with what you do?
It definitely ties in, because for us, resiliency is interwoven, if you will, directly connected to the degree of control and visibility you have of the entire chain. Mm-hmm. If you bring resilience back to kind of reducing single points of failure or single points of dependency, if you will, you first have to know where they are, if you have any. So the visibility of the entire chain is very important with that. Like I said, you can't remove those dependencies if you don't know that they are there in the first place. So it is, for us, absolutely an everyday scenario.
Right, understood. And talking being resilient, let's just switch topics slightly now and talk about how we can make our wonderful planet more resilient too. So probably like yourselves, Orbus is focusing a lot on sustainability this year and beyond, both in terms of its corporate objectives such as offsetting travel emissions, better waste management, and overall ESG efforts, but also in our product as we look to bring and provide a means for customers to view EA through a sustainability lens. I'm sure you're seeing the same thing. It's becoming an increasingly huge topic for many organizations for obvious reasons. Can you share your views on how you believe AIOps is able to support corporate sustainability?
Yeah, very much so. Because as you say, it is an important topic. Always has been, rightly so. We were lucky enough to have been chosen by the Safe Energy Foundation in adopting a metric that they pioneered, which is called the server idle coefficient. I'll explain a little bit more about that. And it kind of proves or shows that, you mentioned domain agnostic earlier, in the use case of AIOps. And that type of data, you could argue, well, what does that got to do with performance? But if you think about, some of the older, let's say, performance challenges, very often the question or the result, of efforts in just make it faster was, well, let's just throw more capacity towards it. Let's increase servers or network bandwidth. And as with many things, you can ask yourself, when is it enough? Mm-hmm. So, and if you don't measure that, you might be ending up just throwing more and more resources at it, not even knowing if that makes a difference. So the metric that the Safe Energy Foundation created, the server idle coefficient, really targets that kind of waste. So time in which a server consumes energy, if you will, but is producing no benefit for the users. So that has now been made part of our platform, and that way we help making data centers around the world greener and more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point around the Save Energy Foundation. We're doing something similar. In fact, we're working together with the SDIA, that's the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance. Their objective really is to standardize the reporting of carbon emissions produced by data centers, hardware, and software. So, Pierre, we should definitely link up on this. I can see some clear overlap and opportunities there.
Absolutely agreed.
Great. But unfortunately, as much as I'd like to chat with you all afternoon, we're just about out of time now. So let's draw this interesting discussion to a close for now. So thank you so much for sharing all that information with us, Pierre, and making time to talk to me. And thank you to all of you out there who are connected with us on this LinkedIn live session, and for those of you who are watching on catch up. So we hope to see you in the next instalment of Orbus Live. So take care and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Rupert, for having me. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll definitely continue this dialogue. Thanks everyone. Bye.